180 today. And Jerry Dias of Unifor, which is the largest private sector union in Canada. Well, what do you think about those two union leaders standing beside the premier as he makes this announcement yesterday?
I don't know that the union leadership in this country is necessarily in full representation mode of its members, frankly.
Okay.
But I do think for workers it's a good thing, and anything that helps workers.
But it's got to be it's a score for Ford to have them there, though, wouldn't you think?
Well, I think it hurts Andrea Horwath more than anyone, frankly.
Oh, I see. Okay, yeah, sure. Susan, the reinvention of Doug Ford?
Yeah. I found this handy-dandy clock online that tells me it's 210 days, 23 hours, 7 minutes, and 37 seconds till the provincial election. And that is 100% what this is all about.
Okay.
But I think Ford is on the right track. He needs to get people working in Ontario. He needs, we need to both attract new workers and get the people who've been out of the workforce because of the pandemic back working again in order to keep the economy moving. Some things, as Chris pointed out, are long overdue, like the foreign credential recognition. I think people will be very happy for the minimum wage, but they will also not forget that Doug Ford canceled that minimum wage. So that's something to be considered. And as far as the union leaders joining him, I think absolutely they had to be there. And of course they would be there for an announcement about a minimum wage increase. But you can bet if there are other things going on that they're not happy about, they'll be back. They'll be back with their brickbats for Premier Ford. So I think they're there for now, but I don't think they're there forever.
All right. We got a few minutes left here. How much time? I have 3 minutes, 4 minutes? Okay. We have time for this, I think. Because, Susan, you call Ottawa home, right? Ottawa's your home.
I do.
Your home, right? Chris, you're an Ottawa guy, Chris. So
proud hometown,
right?
Ottawa guy, yes, indeed.
Light rail. 45 days. Today is 45 days without light rail. People are really suffering. Thank goodness most of the public service is working from home. Gosh. This would just be awful. It's awful if you rely on public transit as it is. You have no other option. You can't Uber every day or whatever the case might be. So certainly this is not a great time politically for Mayor Watson, with a decision expected in a few weeks' time about his own political future and whether he's going to run again in the municipal election next fall, about a year from now. But now this letter drops and it hits the news early this morning, okay, that the Ford government is threatening to withhold $60 million of provincial funding, because all of these big light rail projects are all cost shared, provincial funding for Ottawa's LRT, until the province is satisfied that all of these problems are sorted out. What do you think about that, Chris? What do you read into that? You have knowledge of all of these levels of government. Well, what do you read into that?
Well, I have always said, Rob, that the problems with the LRT that we've seen over the course of years have the real long-term impact of eroding rider trust, but they also run the risk of eroding funder trust, and that's what you're seeing. I think that this is a prudent bit of due diligence, and I would be worried, frankly, if a government wasn't looking at what has been happening here and saying, before we hand over tens or hundreds of billions or millions more of taxpayer dollars, do you have your proverbial S together? And is it going to be safe? And will it have the benefits that you've claimed in trying to secure this money? That is eminently reasonable. I think the mayor's office said as much in their statements to media this morning.
Okay. Susan?
Well, I think it's another torch on Minister Watson to make sure that the Rideau Transit Group et al. Get the train moving as quickly as possible. But if it delays the further construction or the further online ability of the next phase of the project, I don't think that's helpful. So sure, the province has a right to say, yeah, you guys have to get your acts together. This is absolutely ridiculous that the train has been offline for 45 days. Imagine in Toronto if the TTC was offline for 45 days. Yeah. I think people in Ottawa are being taken for granted and treated exceptionally poorly in this case, and it's mind-boggling to me that there were safety issues that have been unresolved for this amount of time.
Yep.
So I think it's a whack from the province to the mayor.
Right, but you just had that countdown, Susan. You just had that countdown clock in front of you until the next election. Do you think there's a political component to this? Light rail is a wedge issue in the provincial election?
Absolutely.
Absolutely, positively. Okay. All right. Okay.
I don't think that the bigger picture piece is at risk over the long term, but I do think, Rob, that the LRT file has been managed in such a way, and I use managed very loosely here, in such a way that funders and riders need to have their trust rebuilt. And that is an uphill battle for city officials at this point.
What a great discussion this morning. Thank you so much to the both of you.
Thanks, Rob.
Yeah, we'll talk soon. Yeah, Susan Smith from Blue Sky and Chris Day, president of Winston Wilmot. Coming up next, it's the Talkback Hour. Something a little different, a little more big picture this morning as we talk about generational fairness. This is the Rob Snow Show on City News.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
Call the Rogers TV viewer response line. Email us or connect with us on social media.
On Wednesday's daytime, Simply Cooking with Chef Season 2 is airing here on Rogers TV. We'll catch up with Chef Daniela. She'll tell us what we can expect for Season 2. Also going to be talking to Kelly Keane. She is a financial educator, specifically talking about retirement planning. It's something we put off far, far too much. And we'll talk to the owner of Trinkets Boutique out there in Spencerville. All that and more on Wednesday.
Everybody knows not to drink and drive, but some people still think it's okay to take drugs and drive. Police have the authority, the ability, and the tools to determine if drivers are impaired by legal or illegal drugs. And because drug-impaired drivers can pose just as great a risk as drunk drivers, they face the same penalties, like the loss of their driver's license, a criminal record, fines, and more. A message from the RCMP, the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, and Arrive Alive, Drive Sober.
Hi, I'm Harriet Clooney. Come check out my show, Scrap Cooking, where I'm going to show you how to use the bits and bobs, the ends, pieces of things that you might otherwise throw in the compost. I'm going to show you how to turn them into something delicious.
Good morning, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. We'll begin the meeting in 1 minute. On va commencer la réunion dans 1 minute. Merci.
If the speech goes after over 30 minutes, I have to break this open. It's an emergency break glass.
See Riley. He's 2 doors down the other way.
If it goes more than 10 minutes, I'm going to come over and grab some of those. Need that coffee crisp fix. So good.
Go now.
Yes.
Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs, et bienvenue à la réunion du Conseil municipal pour la ville d'Ottawa.
Welcome, everyone. This is the November 3rd Ottawa City Council.
November 3rd, 2021, by electronic participation. This meeting will be held through the electronic participation in accordance with Section 238 of the Municipal Act 2001, as amended by the COVID-19 Economic Recovery Act. For For those who are able to, please rise for a moment of personal reflection, and please give special thought to our veterans as we come closer to Remembrance Day and the sacrifices they have made and continue to make for us in our country. Thank you. Merci. Madam Deputy Clerk, roll call, please.
Councillor Luloff.
Present.
Councillor Dudas.
Present.
Councillor Harder.
Here.
Councillor El Shantiri.
Present.
Councillor Gower.
Here.
Councillor Kavanagh.
Here.
Councillor Shirelli. Councillor Eglar.
Here.
Councillor Deans.
Here.
Councillor Tierney.
Present.
Councillor Fleury.
Bonjour.
Councillor King.
Here.
Councillor McKenney.
Present.
Councillor Leeper.
Good morning.
Councillor Brockington.
Here.
Councillor Menard.
Here.
Councillor Cloutier.
Morning, Présent.
Councillor Kitts.
Here.
Councillor DeRoos.
Here.
Councillor Moffat.
Here.
Councillor Meehan.
I'm here.
Councillor Hubley.
Here.
Mayor Watson.
You see?
You have a quorum, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. A declaration of interest, including those originally arising from prior meetings.
I'm interested in the fact that it's Councillor Dudas's birthday, Mr. Mayor, but that's about it.
Well, happy birthday, Councillor Dudas. Bonne fête.
Thank you.
Regrets? No regrets were filed. The 2022 budget. Well, good morning, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. I wish to acknowledge that Ottawa is located on unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. We honor the land and the peoples of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation, whose ancestors have lived in this territory for millennia. Nos cultures et leur présence ont enrichi et continué.
Their presence enriched and continue to do so.
Milestone for our city and our residents as we introduce the 2022 city budget. Our city and our country have been through a lot over the course of the last year and a half. The municipal budget is the main tool that we have to show that we care and that we are being responsive to what is happening around us, and that we are managing the dollars entrusted to us by the residents of Ottawa in a prudent way while trying to respond to a very broad range of competing needs. As members of council know, we receive both formal and informal feedback from tens of thousands of residents each and every year. And that feedback is as diverse as the needs of our communities, continuously changing urban, suburban, and rural communities. Today, I will be focusing on how the world is changing around us and highlight how the city's budget attempts to address these changes. I'll also share highlights of how Budget 2022 tries to be responsive to those trends and citywide needs. The most obvious issue is how our city is emerging from the devastating COVID-19 pandemic and as the fragile economic recovery starts to take hold. Our city is now reorganizing to try to get back to some semblance of business as usual. C'est ce que les résidents font à travers notre ville.
This is what our residents are doing throughout our city, our companies, schools,
and the many city departments had to reorganize to respond to new needs during the pandemic. As a result of the ongoing fight against COVID-19, Ottawa Public Health anticipates significant and ongoing budget pressures in 2022. One of their top priorities is continuing to counter COVID-19 transmission by increasing the vaccination coverage in all eligible populations by over 90%. While the people of Ottawa have on average achieved the 90% coverage rate milestone, there are some neighborhoods where people face greater barriers due to socioeconomic issues and misinformation or poor experiences with the healthcare system previously. OPH has worked closely with these groups and we are seeing the results with hundreds of residents coming to the community hub and pop-up clinics daily for their first shots. The inequity in coverage rates between neighborhoods is dropping. OPH anticipates that the population eligible for COVID-19 vaccination will grow, and OPH, in partnership with the city, will be ready to get our youngest residents vaccinated. On Monday, you heard at the OPH board meeting about their plans to vaccinate youth ages 5 to 11. This could be one of the final pieces of the puzzle in putting an end to COVID-19 in a significant way in Ottawa. This step will not be easy. Nothing in the pandemic has been easy. It's incumbent upon all of us as leaders in our communities to do what we can to ensure that some of our most vulnerable residents are finally protected. This ongoing battle against COVID-19 must be fought while OPH is striving to maintain its core public services and programs, and slowly reinstating additional services as staffing and resources allow. As a result of the ongoing battle against COVID-19, OPH is projecting a $48 million budget shortfall in 2022. Let's remember that over 600 residents of Ottawa have lost their lives since the beginning of the pandemic. We cannot accept seeing more people lose their lives to COVID-19 in our city, and so it is our duty to continue investing to prevent every single preventable death. C'est ainsi notre devoir en tant que ville de continuer à soutenir le travail.
So it is our duty to continue investing to prevent every single preventable death until 2022.
Very closely over the last year and over the course of the pandemic to support individuals, businesses, communities, and municipalities. The Government of Canada and the Province of Ontario responded in a very robust way to our municipal funding pressures in 2021 through the Safe Restart program. That included very strong funding support for OPH's one-time pandemic response costs and other one-time COVID costs. As a city, we are grateful for this funding, without which our resources would have been stretched to the point of breaking during the pandemic. The city's pathway to recovery requires continued close partnership with all three levels of government in this upcoming year. I look forward to working closely with the big city mayors and our partners in the federal and provincial government as we make our case to sustain Safe Restart funding into 2022 and to ensure their promise of keeping public health whole is honored in 2022. Residents are also struggling with recent changes in our economy that are hitting their wallets over the course of the last few months. Inflation is back with a vengeance. Costs are increasing for families and residents at a pace not seen since the late 1980s. There are many media reports and anecdotal feedback from residents who know that the cost of just about everything is rising more rapidly than in the last 20 years or so. The Ottawa Citizen, for instance, reported on October 19th that, quote, economists expect the yearly rate of inflation will hit 4.3%, the highest level in nearly 2 decades. Stats Canada reported in October 2021 the following year-over-year increases in the Ontario Consumer Price Index. Food up 3.7%, meat up 8.2%, natural gas up 14.8%, fuel oil and other fuels up 31%, gasoline up 34.5%. Excuse me. And recently, the Bank of Canada signaled that it was planning to start raising interest rates, which will increase mortgage payments for anyone with a variable mortgage rate and for individuals and families planning to buy their first home. And although we have little control over inflation, we do have 100% control over the level of municipal taxation. There's actually something quite practical that the city can do to help honor our commitment to the 3% tax cap. When a strong majority of council members voted to ask staff to deliver a municipal budget based on a 3% tax cap, they could not anticipate this bout of high inflation. The last thing we need to do today is to make housing even more out of reach and unaffordable for residents of Ottawa. We need to make it easier, not harder, for people on fixed income, seniors on pensions, young families purchasing their first home, or struggling to keep in their existing home. The fact that almost every other household expenditure is increasing for Ottawa residents provides an even more compelling reason for us to hold the line on property tax increases. This is why Budget 2022 focuses on affordability for residences and businesses, holding the line on property tax at 3%. This amounts to an extra $119 for the average urban homeowner and $91 for the average rural homeowner. There's a great amount of research on how high inflation hurts low-income populations most, as they tend to spend more of their income on the necessities of life. Last fall, for instance, the Conference Board of Canada reported that, and I quote, "Today's inflation means that low-income Canadians may have more difficulty maintaining their existing quality of life than high-income households. This can force low-income families, many of whom live paycheck to paycheck, to cut back on essentials like healthy food." Cette nouvelle réalité économique mettra encore plus de pression sur nos services.
This new reality will have more pressure on our social services in 2022.
Our social safety net become even more important during this time. As income started to plummet and job losses mounted early in the pandemic, the Government of Canada moved to provide income support to Canadians at a level not seen since the Great Depression. These programs are now being pared back as the economy continues to rebound, but social needs remain. Our most vulnerable residents are unlikely to take part in our city's economic rebound, but their needs have not diminished. The pandemic showed how vital community and social services are to the most vulnerable members of our community. Frontline workers in community and municipal social services worked tirelessly to ensure that their needs, the needs of our most vulnerable neighbors, were looked after. This includes community health and resource centers, food banks, shelters for women fleeing violence, and much more. Budget 2022 proposes a $1.6 million base budget increase over 2 years to the community funding framework, plus an inflationary increase of $495,000, bringing the total program envelope above $27 million, and making this the largest funding increase to this program since 2006. A total of 95 agencies are recommended to receive funding, including 22 new agencies focused on equity and inclusion. Agencies such as the Ottawa Black Mental Health Coalition, the Ottawa Aboriginal Coalition, Westboro Beach Community Kitchen, and the Osgood Youth Association will be added to the Sustainability Fund envelope. The province of Ontario has played a key role in supporting local community-based social service agencies during the pandemic through the Social Services Relief Fund. The fight against homelessness was challenging before. COVID made it even tougher.
The City of Ottawa is taking action on very different aspects to fight the housing issue.
In March 2021, Council approved the city's first long-range financial plan for housing at the city. Budget 2022 delivers on the commitment to add $1 million in base funding to the capital budget for affordable housing capital for a total new commitment of $15 million. Staff estimates that $2 million in development charge exemptions will bolster this program in 2022, reducing the cost of adding new affordable units for our nonprofit housing partners. Of the 1,730 affordable housing units that are in various stages of development across the city, a total of 232 supportive housing units and 229 affordable housing units will be completed by the end of 2022. Members of Council will recall that this forms part of Council's commitment to invest $200 million over 10 years under the new long-range financial plan for housing. Of any level of government, the City of Ottawa is the single largest permanent funder of affordable housing and homelessness programs and supports in our city a commitment of $119 million for 2022. That's an increase of 6.25% over this past year. This includes funding for rent supplements, support for housing and homelessness agencies, funding for supportive housing operations. And Budget 2022 demonstrates to our funding partners that we are ready to leverage much needed funding from other levels of government. Now that we have a tangible plan for what is needed locally, I'm confident we can, working closely with the other big city mayors, make the case to upper levels of government to increase funding support for housing. As affordable transportation is critical for low-income residents, the cost of the Equipass and the Community Pass for ODSP program recipients will remain frozen at 2018 rates for another year. Later today, the Transit Commission will bring forward a plan to provide up to 2,000 no-charge passes for shelter residents, our most vulnerable residents, and I thank members of the Transit Commission who have worked on this project for their leadership. Residents of long-term care homes have also been disproportionately affected by the pandemic. The provincial government is committed to increasing funding for long-term care home operators with a goal to provide an average of 4 hours of direct care per resident per day. The provincial funding increase will take place gradually, with initial funding flowing to operators in 2021-2022 and full funding anticipated by 2025. These changes will result in an additional $6.2 million flowing to the city's long-term care facilities in 2022 to support enhanced resident care. Budget 2022 also includes $2.1 million in capital funding for air conditioning units in our long-term care homes to enhance the quality of life of residents. I can't imagine how unbearable the last heat wave must have been for our vulnerable residents, seniors, in long-term care facilities. And I'm incredibly grateful for all those who cared for and vaccinated our residents over the past 20 months. This includes our city paramedics, who are some of the unsung heroes in our fight against COVID-19. It is unlikely that we can find time in our city's history when we needed our paramedics, healthcare, and other frontline workers more than during the pandemic. They helped contain outbreaks in long-term care facilities and supported COVID-19 testing centers and vaccination clinics as our community was immunized against COVID-19. Budget 2022 includes 14 new paramedics and 12 new ambulances to address citywide growth in call volumes, bringing the total hiring in this term of council to 56 net new paramedics. Council also recently approved the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan. This will give our city a framework for how to manage local risks to safety and well-being at the community level. A total of $34 million in existing budgets and resources is already allocated by the city in support of the plan. Budget 2022 includes new funding request of $760,000 for 4 FTEs with an administrative budget of $250,000. This is a crucial first step, as this funding supports the creation of an office responsible for the successful development and implementation of the plan. Over the course of the last year, we have received feedback about the future level of funding required by the Ottawa Police Service. Today, the Ottawa Police Service tabled its tax increase at 2.86% rather than 3%. This frees up $435,000 in available funding to support the development of an innovative pilot project. Led by Intercity Health and supported by many partners, including the Canadian Mental Health Association, the pilot project will address growing mental health needs in the Byward Market area, issues that have been exacerbated by the pandemic. This funding will be allocated to the mental health pillar of the city's community and safety well-being plan. Following the recent discussions with Chief Slowly, I was pleased to hear that he has decided to reinstate 2 teams of foot patrol officers in the Byward Market and Rideau Street. These officers will be covering the neighborhood between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. through a redeployment of resources. I know this OPS presence will be a relief to the BIA members, Ottawa Markets team, and residents and visitors, which have been advocating for this model for a number of months. I'd like to take this opportunity to remind members of council that the public that a municipal council has limited authority over the size and mandate of police services in the municipality. And as you may be aware, salaries make up over 82% of the budget of the Ottawa Police Service.
We had a very important discussion over the last year about the Ottawa Service Police budget.
Is around the table or in the community, I believe that a strong majority of members of council do not want to see a reduced police presence in their neighborhoods and on our streets. The collaboration I just outlined between OPS and the city to support small businesses and residents in the Byward Market is a shining example of what we need more of in our city, a focus on action over words. Hundreds of small businesses in the market and across the city are still hanging on by their fingernails. They are the backbone of our local economy, creating employment and contributing to neighborhood vibrancy and quality of life in every single part of Ottawa, rural, suburban, urban. Through the Mayor's Economic Partners Task Force and the Economic Roundtable, we have delivered several initiatives to support economic recovery in many sectors, and we will continue to do so. Throughout the pandemic, we have offered a high level of support to our restaurants, who have all suffered during many lockdowns as our province faced spikes in COVID-19. Over the past 2 summers, we waived patio fees and expanded the patio program, which led to roughly 250 new patios and 7 street closures that generated 500 paying seats for those restaurants. I'm very pleased to say that the patio fees will be waived once again in 2022, a $270,000 investment in our restaurant and hospitality industry. I'm also very proud of the new small business tax subclass that Council approved just last month. Starting next year, 10,000 small businesses across the city will benefit from a permanent tax reduction of 15%, with the first reduction of 7.5% coming in 2022. As you know, this is coming at no cost to residential taxpayers, as the larger commercial and industrial class will absorb the tax shift. This is showing our small businesses that the city is here to give them a helping hand, and here are a few examples of how that tax cut will benefit local businesses. A small food store in Matitic will see a reduction of $265 in municipal taxes. A restaurant on Richmond Road will see a decrease of $3,300. A small bicycle shop on St. Joseph Boulevard in Orleans will see a reduction of $1,620. And a small automotive trailer shop on Stittsville Main Street will see a decrease of $3,500 in municipal taxes over the 2-year period. The total benefit of this shift for small businesses is about $9.9 million in 2022.
This type of support helps our businesses to keep on going while we're still fighting this pandemic.
City partners have been playing a key role in this front as well. During the pandemic, Invest Ottawa pivoted its operations and helped 1,589 small businesses develop their online presence and sales capacity through the Digital Main Street program. They've also supported another 250 businesses through their regular entrepreneurship and mentorship programs. With their sustained investment in our city's young innovators and entrepreneurs, Invest Ottawa continues to support the next generation of tech entrepreneurs in our city. To counter the uneven and prolonged pace of recovery in the hardest hit sectors, especially tourism, the city is working with Ottawa Tourism and partners from the cultural sector on a strategy to leverage our cultural assets and experience in order to position 2022 as the year of cultural tourism in the nation's capital. Attracting visitors to Ottawa is critical to our local economy, which has experienced $2.8 billion in lost visitor spending since the start of the pandemic. Let's remember that tourism and hospitality is the third most important sector in our city, supporting over 40,000 jobs. Returning to robust economic activity across all sectors of the local economy will also require talent and a skilled workforce. Building on Invest Ottawa's talent program and in consultation with our post-secondary institutions and private sector employers, the city is facilitating discussions to develop strategies to better align skills, training, co-op placements, and the recruitment process for our hardest hit sectors. As a first step, the city is committed to and is working with Ottawa's post-secondary institutions to increase its hiring of co-op students to at least 70 next year and to surpass 100 co-op placements in the city of Ottawa proper by 2024. The economic rebound of our festival and special event sector is another key priority for the city. Throughout August and September, we invested $20,000 and worked with the Ottawa Music Industry Coalition to offer a series of municipal performances and BIAs across the city. This program not only supported local musicians, it also reintroduced residents to the live music performances they had so missed since the beginning of the pandemic. To help support the music sector as it recovers from the devastating impacts of the pandemic, the city has developed a rental relief program that will deliver affordable access to the city's showcase facilities. In order to support artists and not-for-profit cultural organizations, a 50% reduction in rental rates is now available to eligible clients for city facilities like the Aberdeen Pavilion, the Horticulture Building, the Shakeman Arts Center, and the Meridian Center Theaters at Centrepoint. This support will be in place until the end of 2022 and is reflected in the draft budget. We can see
that we're recovering in our city, mainly in the construction sector and the skill sector.
Services teams have never stopped delivering to ensure that we can maintain the growth in our city. By the end of Q2 2021, almost 5,800 building permits had been issued by the city, up 40% over the same period last year. The team just issued building permit number 10,000 on October 15th, 2 months before that same permit number was issued last year, and most years we don't even get to 10,000. Although certain sectors are thriving and our city has the lowest unemployment rate of any large city in Canada, many residents have lost their job while others have resorted to precarious employment between lockdowns. So we can't let up on our efforts to support small businesses and bring back all the jobs that were lost during the pandemic. And through these challenging economic times, residents expect us to maintain a strong focus on the core municipal infrastructure they rely on to get to work, to get around their neighborhoods, and to enjoy our public and community spaces. In 2022, we maintain our 1% commitment to closing the infrastructure funding gap. The city will be increasing its spending this year on capital, which includes roads, bridges, culverts, parks, and rec facilities, and other municipal infrastructure from $781 million this year to $989 million in 2022, a huge increase of $209 million. That is 26% more spending on core infrastructure than the city spent last year, and is being funded from three main sources: property taxes, rate, and development charges. I want to thank Council for its steadfast commitment to the infrastructure renewal program, because if we don't set and stick to our priorities, then we're operating really without a plan. To deliver on this priority, Budget 2022 invests in a large number of road projects across the city, including Greenfield Avenue, Main Street, and Hawthorne Road rebuild, Robert Grant Avenue extension, Mitch Owens Road resurfacing, Torwood resurfacing, Greenbank Road preliminary design, Jeanne d'Arc Boulevard resurfacing, and Bank Street widening in the south end, to name just a few. Residents spoke and members of council listened and agreed that we had to make long-term commitments to infrastructure renewal. That is why the city's spending on roads renewal will increase from $74.2 million in 2021 to $133.3 million in 2022. This includes $76 million for road resurfacing compared to $36 million last year. The growth-funded road investment increases from $56 million in 2021 to $69 million in 2022. And total spending on roads is set to increase from $130 million in 2021 to $203.2 million in 2022, an increase of 56%. Because the geographic reality of our city hasn't changed, we still need to maintain and repair a very extensive network of roads, pedestrian and cycling pathways, and sidewalks to get residents from one end of the city to the other, and to facilitate mobility within and between neighborhoods. We clear and maintain 2,400 kilometers of sidewalk, the equivalent of walking from City Hall to Tampa Bay, Florida. And the city clears more than 50 kilometers of winter-maintained cycling lanes. And we need to continue investing in our sidewalk and multi-use pathways in all our communities, which contribute to reduce GHG emissions through a favorable modal split. That is why Budget 2022 includes $11.5 million for sidewalks and pathways, an additional $2.9 million for pedestrian facilities, $8.7 million for cycling facilities, $1.2 million for active transportation missing links, and $2.2 million for major active transportation structures. The city's spending on active transportation increases to $26.7 million in 2022 from $21.3 million, a 25% increase. Our spending on cycling facilities and pathways is set to increase from $13.1 million to $14.1 million. It may not be sexy, but for tens of thousands of residents, including our seniors and residents with physical mobility issues, a well-maintained sidewalk can be a huge quality of life improvement. Ça peut faire la différence entre pouvoir marcher.
This can make the difference in between walking to a neighbor's house or going to the convenience store.
To adults who live alone, to moms pushing a stroller, it's also a low-cost fitness option for all of our residents. And ward councillors are keenly aware of the traffic issues in their wards. Budget 2022 maintains the $50,000 fund for each ward for local traffic calming spending, and an additional $446,000 for the highly popular Safer Roads Ottawa program, and $530,000 for new PXOs to enhance safety along the right-of-way. Between now and the end of 2022, we will see 15 new speed cameras installed in school zones. Budget 2022 also includes $7.2 million accelerating the implementation of the Strategic Road Safety Action Plan. Total road safety investment in 2022 increases to $44.3 million from $37 million in 2021. The long-term health of our community is also challenged by the ongoing impacts of climate change. Council has taken a number of bold steps to create a path to a more sustainable environment. Through the pandemic, Ottawa residents relied on our public green spaces more than ever before. That is why Budget 2022 will invest $6 million in community assets to renew parks across the city. Budget 2022 also includes funding of $1.6 million with a goal to plant 125,000 trees. Protecting our waterways and green space and building resiliency to changes in Ottawa's climate are significant priorities for our council. That's why the budget invests $1 million in Ottawa River Action Plan and Wet Weather Infrastructure Master Plan. The city's climate change master plan sets targets to reduce community GHG emissions by 100% by 2050 and corporate emissions by 100% in 2040. To help reach that goal, the budget includes $55 million for for 74 buses. The city is partnering with Canada Infrastructure Bank and Infrastructure Canada to replace 74 40-foot diesel buses with 74 zero-emission electric buses. Once these buses are on the road, GHG emissions will be reduced by 7,000 tons annually. The business case for this purchase and financing arrangement will be brought to Council for approval in the first or second quarter of 2022. The budget will fund an EA study for the Via Rail train yards multi-use pathway in Alta Vista. This will be a key asset to increase connectivity between the Tremblay station of LRT and the new commercial and residential developments at train yards. In the East End, the city will invest to design the future multi-use pedestrian facility at the Trim LRT station, providing a much-needed connection from the transit station to Petrie Island, La Cité Collégiale's Eastern Campus, and the residential and future developments north of the 174. Located in Orleans Ward, it will benefit the numerous visitors to the popular Petrie Island regional facility from all parts of the city, including our neighbors in Clarence Rockland and residents of Cumberland. These investments will contribute to the future of sustainable transportation in our city, enhancing the ability of Ottawa residents to engage in active transportation while reducing our reliance on cars and safeguarding the environment. The budget includes $1 million to support the transition to a greener municipal fleet and an additional $3 million for the energy management investment strategy for a total investment of $11 million over the term of council. $800,000 in additional funding from Hydro Ottawa dividend surplus was approved by council last week to support energy evolution priority projects in 2022. This includes initiatives like our lead replacement partnership with Ottawa Hydro, which conserves both energy and money. Last year, approximately 2,600 streetlights were converted to LED, saving approximately $257,000 annually, and 2,400 streetlights will be converted to LEDs in 2022. Whenever possible, it will be used to leverage federal and provincial funds for greater impact. And despite our strong disappointment in RTG and Alstom's performance to date, with the continued demand from residents to extend LRT citywide remains. The city will spend $963 million of previously approved budget authority on the Stage 2 build of our light rail system that will see us go farther east, west, and south. This investment, combined with the Confederation Line investment, is the single largest contribution to GHG reduction in the city's history. The Stage 2 project is estimated to annually reduce GHG emissions by over 110,000 tons by 2048. I'm proud of Council's commitment to building our city's environmental resiliency. Ottawa is well positioned to leverage partnerships with other levels of government towards these important goals for future generations living in our city. Over the course of the coming days and weeks, each committee and board will be debating and reviewing the budget. I want to thank all members of council who provided their input on the draft budget to the city manager and myself. I also want to thank our committee chairs, deputy mayors, and committee members for all the hard work that they have put into this budget and the hard work that remains as we go through the committee system. This is an important time for all members of council and the public to share their views on the spending priorities outlined in the budget. I want to take this opportunity in closing to thank Steve Kanalakis, our city manager, and Wendy Stephenson, our chief financial officer, for their hard work on the 2022 budget. I also thank you to all the general managers for their work on the draft budget, and want to thank and acknowledge the hundreds of employees who worked on this financial roadmap for 2022. I look forward to following the healthy debate over the course of the coming weeks. I believe that our professional staff have worked very diligently to ensure that Council's broad policy orientations and directions are in fact reflected in the draft budget. As I mentioned earlier, it's a very delicate balancing act. Il existe des centaines et des centaines de propositions concurrentes.
There are hundreds of proposals on the way to spend our limited income, our limited funds.
Which leads invariably to a great diversity of needs and opinions about how to spend these tax dollars. Budget 2022 provides a strong pathway for recovery. It remains Council's key commitments to support our most vulnerable neighbors. It positions our city to continue and win the fight against COVID-19. It continues to invest in our roads, sidewalks, and multi-use pathways. It strives to help businesses bounce back from the pandemic, and it endeavors to make sure it endeavors to make our city more sustainable for future generations. Lastly, it honors Council's pledge to keep our city affordable as a new round of inflation threatens the purchasing power of all residents and is likely to hurt vulnerable residents more severely. The budget that is being tabled today was developed with careful financial stewardship as we emerge from a global pandemic. I believe this budget strikes the right balance between the two competing needs. It maintains the essential city services that residents depend on and invests in the future in a prudent manner that gives us flexibility to change course and alter our response to the pandemic as developments unfold. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. And we have a motion from Councillor Dudas and Councillor Deroux, please.
Be it resolved that the mayor's remarks given at the City Council meeting on November 3rd, 2021 be appended to the minutes of today's council meeting.
The motion carried.
Carried.
Motion to introduce reports. Motion portant présentation de rapport. Councillor Kavanaugh and Cloutier, please.
Que les rapports suivants sur la prévision budgétaire 2022 soient reçus et déposés.
That the following reports related to the 2022 draft budget estimates be received and tabled. The report from the Deputy City Treasurer's Corporate Finance, entitled 2022 Draft Operating and Capital Budgets. And 2, the report from the Committee of Adjustment, entitled Committee of Adjustment 2022 Draft Operating Budget. 3, the report from Crime Prevention Ottawa, entitled 2022 Draft Operating Budget, Crime Prevention Ottawa. And 4, the report from the Ottawa Police Services Board, entitled Ottawa Police Services Board 2022 Draft Operating and Capital Budgets. And 5, the report from the Ottawa Public Library Board, entitled Ottawa Public Library 2022 Draft Budget Estimate. And 6, the report from the Ottawa Board of Health, entitled 2022 Draft Operating Budget for the Ottawa Board of Health. And that the rules of procedure be suspended to receive and consider the following reports from the Innovative Client Services Department, as they provide information supplemental to the 2022 budget reports being tabled at this meeting. 1, the report from the Director of Fleet Services, entitled 2022 Fleet Vehicle and Equipment Plans, information supplemental to the budget estimates. And 2, report from the Director of Human Resources, entitled FTE Analysis Report, information supplemental to the budget estimates.
Merci. Adopté. Carried.
Thank you. Carried.
2022 Draft Operating Capital Budgets, budget plémitaire et fonctionnement et démobilisation de 2022. Mr. Cadillac, our City Manager, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have just a few short comments to make before I pass it over to Wendy Stephenson, our Chief Financial Officer. Today's draft 2022 budget is a result of tremendous collaborative effort between our elected officials and city staff. And I want to take a moment to personally thank the member and all members of council for sharing their valuable insights to guide the development of the proposed budget, including key priorities that are at the top of your constituents' minds as we head into 2022. I also want to thank Wendy Stephenson, our Chief Financial Officer, Isabel Jasmine, our Deputy City Treasurer, and the entire Finance Services team for working tirelessly during the last 2 months to pull together a draft budget that we believe captures Council's feedback and supports the needs of our residents and community as we move forward. I also want to thank the entire senior leadership team and the departmental supports for working so collaboratively through the budget process. Before I hand it over to Wendy, I want to take a moment to help set the context for today's draft budget tabling. As the mayor mentioned in his remarks, the last 18 months have been among the most challenging the city has ever seen, and certainly that I've ever seen in my 36-year career. It's been a marathon. And as the finish line slowly comes into view, I'm incredibly proud of the tremendous effort our city has put into responding to the evolving needs of our community every step of the way. City staff continue to deliver the municipal services our residents depend on each day throughout each stage of the pandemic, from emergency response to recovery operations. Our people never missed a beat. Whether it was adapting to the way we provide service, focusing efforts and resources to help our most vulnerable, implementing robust safety protocols, running mass immunization clinics, the list goes on and on. More than 1,000 city employees were redeployed to support the city's response to the pandemic. It's truly remarkable when you think back on everything that's been done to protect the health and safety of our city and our residents since all of this began nearly 2 years ago. But it's not over yet. While things look hopeful, we're not yet quite back to normal. And like other municipalities, and speaking to my colleagues across the country, our ongoing pandemic response has created budget pressures that we could have never prepared for. However, the city's longstanding record of fiscal responsibility and the immediate actions we took at the outset have helped mitigate many of these financial impacts. We shut down facilities, we placed part-time staff and declared emergency leave, we paused all mandatory hiring, non-mandatory hiring, and discretionary spending. We ramped up advocacy efforts for financial assistance from the federal and provincial governments, and so much more. The city made every effort to restrict spending so there would be less pressure down the line for taxpayers and council as they consider their budget for 2022. Because of our strong financial management, I have no doubt Ottawa will begin to emerge from this pandemic on solid, stable footing. The draft 2022 budget before you today is a result of countless hours combing through our finances to come up with the best possible solutions to continue delivering the essential services our residents rely on while still advancing council's priorities in the context of COVID-19. It's a budget that couples responsible fiscal spending to place us on the road to recovery while ensuring the city remains responsive to the pandemic, the health of our residents, and the resilience of our local economy. And with that, I'd like to hand it over, Mr. Mayor, to Wendy Stephenson for the budget presentation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Kanalakis. And just to remind members of council that we'll go through the city treasurer's presentation and then on to all of the committees. So hold your questions for the main presentation until we're finished with the committees. And as you know, we're only dealing with the tabling of the budget, and process questions only are in order. We're not getting into the specifics at this stage, as is our tradition. So Ms. Stephenson, the floor is yours.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Maire et conseiller, and thank you, Steve.
Good day, Mr. Mayor and councillors. I'm here today with my colleague, Isabelle Jasmine, to present to you the 2022 budget.
For 2022. And today's presentation is an overview of all the city budgets, including police, public health, library, and transit. And today we're going to cover the highlights, the assumptions, provide a brief overview of our operating capital budgets, as well as the funding sources, and present our estimated requirements to continue to respond and recover from the COVID pandemic. And just remember, today is a summary. It's provided in the presentation, and the detailed budgets will be presented at each committee, board, or commission. And today's budget reflects the directions that were approved by council in July. And I'm just going to ask Carol if you could bring up the presentation. Thank you. Thank you very much. You can move to the second slide, please. Steve talked a lot about the efforts that we've taken over the last 18 months in terms of ensuring we have strong financial management at the city. And I want to talk a little bit about some of the things that we've done for a very long time, because it's really set the foundation in terms of how strong we are financially. And council has played a leading role in the city's financial approach to financial prudence and financial sustainability. Strong financial management is a priority for our city, council, and our residents. It's really the foundation of our success. Throughout the years, we've adopted strong financial policies and plans that have led to our financial sustainability through things like our very first long-range financial plan that was adopted in 2002 and refreshed each term of council. We've advanced various long-range financial plans, specifically the Housing and Homelessness 10-year plan, which was done in 2021, and the Solid Waste Master Plan. the adoption of our fiscal framework that sets out our high-level roadmap for sustainable city finances, and the Council endorsement of our strategic asset management plan and the state of the assets report to support our continued investment in infrastructure. Adoption of our reserve management policy ensures that our cash and investments remain at healthy levels while we're still investing in our future. And throughout this time, staff have conducted many reviews of our operations, ensuring that our administrative staff is as lean as possible so that our growth investments are directed to our frontline services where it matters the most. From 2001 to 2018, the city has achieved $361 million in efficiency savings and eliminated just under 17,000 FTEs. These savings have been achieved through a series of structured, continuous improvement initiatives in areas such as business process improvements, organizational and administrative efficiencies, technological improvements, and enhances in revenues using our best practice programs. Management has accommodated growth through a series of initiatives, including reviewing our expenditures and implementing reductions that don't affect our service delivery, streamlining our processes, our administration, and also strategic investment and implementations of technological improvements and organizational adjustments to ensure the redeployment of FTEs to our frontline services. Prochaine diapo, s'il vous plaît. As a result of Council's actions, the city entered the pandemic in a sound financial position, and we've maintained that throughout the pandemic with the support of Council. The city has a healthy balance of reserves, a very strong AAA credit rating recently confirmed by Moody's, and we enjoy low debt levels below the provincial maximum and below the Council-approved thresholds. We've taken a prudent and balanced approach while continuously improving and investing in our future. COVID-19 has resulted in significant financial challenges for the city right from the beginning in 2020, and it continues into 2022 and possibly beyond that. We're not alone. All municipalities are affected. The city's been proactive with Council support to mitigate our financial impacts. With the city mitigations in prior years and in 2021, as well as funding from senior levels of government, we've weathered the storm, and our financial mitigations will help us deliver on the key priorities for Budget 2022. Prochaine diapo, s'il vous plaît. Various factors have to be taken into consideration when developing the budget. We look at our non-COVID pressures, and they're accommodated within our 3% tax increase. We also take into account our one-time COVID impacts, and they're included in the Budget 2022 with the assumption that funding will come from senior levels of government, and also some of those are financed by our reserves. If funding is received, the reserves can be returned to source. This budget includes some growth in FTEs, including our paramedics, as well as supporting Council's strategic priorities. To continue our response to COVID, temporary resources will be used to continue to support our community. Another factor is the impact of collective agreements and changes in our labor regulations. So, for example, some of the required increases that we have to make to our Canada Pension Plan. Inflation must also be included to ensure the budget is keeping pace with the cost of providing services. Base adjustments are also made to reflect any 2021 budget experiences that will continue. So things like pressure on the city's insurance. We also must build into the budget the cost of maintaining the city's growing infrastructure and delivering services to a growing population. Lastly, we also had to consider any changes to provincial funding. So things like the elimination of the doubling of the gas tax or changes to funding levels of provincial programs. Next slide, please. So the budget directions were approved in July with the main direction to limit the tax increase to the municipal portion of the property tax bill to no more than 3%. Each component of the municipal tax bill, which includes our police, transit, are increasing at different rates, but the overall tax increase remains at 3%. The additional taxation revenues from new assessment generates an additional 1.7%, which exceeds our original forecast of 1.4%. User fees and charges are to increase at the cost of delivering those services, as stated in the fiscal framework, the long-range financial plans, as well as some incremental COVID-19 cost recovery. The budget also reflects a 2.5% increase in transit fares on January 1st, 2022. And the budget proposes a fare freeze continue for EcoPass and community passes at the 2018 rates. This equates to additional $415,000 budget pressure to cover the discounts on these passes in 2022, which is included in the Employment and Social Services budget. And the rate budget has been developed in accordance with the long-range financial plan for our rate programs. You can move to the next slide, please. Staff have conducted a thorough review of financial mitigation measures, and we've used all the tools to absorb base pressures with no frontline service impact and to offset our growth-related pressures, as well as some of the COVID-19 costs. The discretionary spending and hiring pauses currently in place will continue into 2022, which assists us in lowering the city's expenses. And additional budget reduction strategies have been initiated in parallel to this budget process, and we'll leverage them if they're required. Further mitigation measures will have impacts on our reserves, our capital projects, and our service levels. I'll now pass it over to Isabel.
Thank you, Wendy. Next slide. Avec ce budget, l'habitation urbaine moyenne évaluée à
With this budget, we will see an increase of 3% for the average assessment for $19 a year. And the rural housing will have an increase of 2.8%, so $91 per year, or $758 a month, and commercial properties will see an increase of $240 per year. The dollar value is an estimated amount based on the budget. The real amount will be based on the real assessment of the property. And this will be done before the finalization of the tax rate.
$415,000 will see an increase of $119 per year, or $9.92 per month, which is 3%. A rural home will see an increase of $91 per year, or $7.58 per month, or 2.8%. And a commercial property, $240 per year, or $20 per month. The dollar value is an estimated number based on the budget. The actual amount will be based on the actual valuation of the properties and the changes to the tax policy adopted by Council before finalizing the tax rates. Next slide, please. Comme dans le cas de la facture d'impôt foncier, les
As for the tax bill, the various components of the water bill will increase at various rates, but for the average property, which uses 180 meters cubic meter of water, there will be an increase of $2.99 a month. A single detached home in the rural area will see an increase of $6.25 per year, or 52 cents a month. These increases are in line with the operating requirements and capital requirements in each sector of activity.
The various components of the water bill are increasing at different rates, but for the average urban property consuming 180 cubic meters of water a year, the overall average increase is 4.2%, or $35.90 annually, or $2.99 per month. For the average rural non-connected single-family home, the increase is $6.25 for the year, or 52 cents per month. The rate increases are aligned with the operating and capital requirements in each service area. Next slide, please. And Wendy.
Yeah, thanks very much, Isabel. The total budget for 2022 is $4.14 billion, and it's made up of 12 different service areas. Over 58% of the operating budget is made up of 4 key services: water and sewer, our police services, transit, and community and social services. And as you'll see on the next slide, much of the revenue for these services comes from sources other than tax. Water and sewer is paid for by revenue from the water bill, and half of the transit operating costs are paid by fare revenue, and over 80% of the community and social services is paid for by provincial and federal funding. Capital contributions make up the 5th largest percentage of the budget at $370 million. Next slide, please. This graph shows the sources of funding for the $4.14 billion budget. You can see that user fees and property taxes are the main sources of revenue to support the operations at the city. Property taxes and payment in lieu of taxes add up to $2.1 billion and make up more than 51% of the city's revenues. User fees and service charges are budgeted at $937 million, including revenue from the water bill, transit fares, recreational fees, and various other fees to recover the cost of delivering user-specific services. The $862 million shown for the federal and provincial funding represents conditional grants for services such as social services, childcare services, long-term care, paramedics, and others. As conditional grants for these funds are not available to use for any other purpose. The government funding source also includes one-time funding for the city's 2022 COVID pressures to continue its response and recovery efforts. Can move to the next slide, please. Thank you.
So this slide shows the staffing changes requested in the 2022 budget. These FTE requests are to address areas of growth and are primarily funded by revenues and increases in funding from the province. The only growth increase in city services are for an additional 14 paramedics, which are 50% funded by the province, 4 FTEs for community safety and well-being, 2 FTEs to support the fraud and waste hotline, and 4 FTEs to support various programs like the Housing and Homelessness Initiative, Diversity and Equity, hiring for the counselor's assistants, and Indigenous consultations. Another 2.63 are funded by the province for long-term care, and recreation and culture compliance is funded by Efficiencies. 11 FTEs were funded in 2021 and are made permanent in 2022. This results in a net overall addition of 37.63 FTEs in the tax-supported service areas. The increase in Ottawa Public Library is a result of the expansion of Sunday hours and 1 position for virtual programming. There are no FTEs for Ottawa Police Services in budget 2022. The increases in transit FTEs are a result of a reduction of 70 FTEs for reduced service hours, but an increase of 83 for a regulatory requirement for paid breaks, 38 for enhanced cleaning, and 10 others for regulatory safety requirements and O-train opening. Next slide, please. Did you move to the next slide?
Can we get the next slide, please? Just be a moment.
Thank you.
Okay.
La capacité de financement créée comme suite à une
The funding capacity will lead to a tax increase with the income we get from other levels of government. The new evaluation will add $31 million in tax revenue and generates $56 million more. The revenue will increase by $40 million, and the provincial cost sharing is at $1.5 million for the paramedic services.
Created as a result of the proposed tax increases, user fee increases, and revenue that we are receiving from other levels of government total $129.1 million. New assessment adds an additional $31.1 million in taxes. The 3% overall tax revenue increase generates another $56.1 million. User fees and revenues are increasing by $40.3 million. This not only includes regular inflationary and cost recovery increases in fees like solid waste, transit, and recreational services, but also increases in general revenues to the city, such as investment revenue, penalties and interest, as well as the temporary incremental COVID-19 fee cost recovery and the revenue from the additional automated speed enforcement cameras. The increase of matching funding from provincial cost sharing is $1.5 million, primarily to cover paramedics. Next slide, please.
In developing the draft budget, one of the first steps is to review the previous year, where there were cost or revenue increases or decreases that were not anticipated but are of a permanent nature. This table shows the key factors from 2021 that will have an impact in 2022. The decrease of $11 million in the transit-based budget is the full year savings from the service reductions in 2022. There's an increase in compensation costs of $4.5 million in transit for the additional 30-minute break required by legislation and increases in WSIB costs. As a result of the LED conversion, there's a $600,000 reduction in energy costs. The solid waste program operating costs are increasing due to an aging landfill and the increased demand and cost for the on-street collection of the recycling bin program. There's a $625,000 increased cost for streetlight monitoring, inspection, and maintenance systems. For paramedics, there's a $735,000 annualization of the budget pressure from last year's increase of the 14 FTEs. And for public safety, there's an increase of $310,000 for 2.5 FTEs approved in 21, offset by user fees. There's also an adjustment to reverse the savings of the $2.9 million from lower ridership in 2021 from the Equipass subsidy. Next slide, please. So next, we identify the cost to maintain the services that we're already providing. Compensation, benefit costs, and legislative increases to CPP are the largest increase overall at the city, of $47.2 million. Inflationary increases to fuel pricing, facilities costs, purchase services, contracts, and utilities, that's up to $34 million. Inflationary increases for utilities range from between 3 to 5%, and increase on contracts were matched to the contract terms. Deal fuel prices were increased by 10%, so basically moving up our baseline from 0.98 to 1.08 based on the current and estimated hedged prices. And the city has a policy of hedging of diesel fuel at 75% over the next 8 months, and then rolling that over so that coverage rolls into the next 2 8-month intervals. Hedging fuel helps us to ensure budget stability and certainty so that the city is not exposed to large market fluctuations. There's also an inflationary increase to community grants of 2%, and that equates to $495,000, and the subsidy for the Equipass and Community Pass, and that's $415,000 that I mentioned earlier, and maintaining those fares at 2018 rates. Insurance premiums increase again in 2022 as a result. $850,000 is added to the base. 17.6 is the increase to capital, which includes the contribution to continue to reduce the annual funding gap for the tax-supported capital, as well as an increase for capital inflation of $2.9 million and a reduction in debt servicing of $2.7 million. There's an increased capital contribution of $2 million for solid waste and 9.6 for transit, which includes the $5 million to make up for the cancellation of the doubling of the gas tax. For the housing long-range financial plan, we've also increased the annual contribution for capital for affordable housing, which brings the base annual budget to $7 million, and cash reserves going towards the total $15 million capital program. As part of that, $500,000 was also added to our development charge exemptions budget for the increase in the affordable housing units to be built, increasing the base to $2 million in line with the long-range financial plan. And there's also $9.1 million contribution to reserves for the election. And library services are also adding $300,000 to automate their materials handling system. Next slide, please.
The cost of growth in 2022 is $20.7 million. This includes a contribution to the Safer Road Reserve Fund of $8.7 million for road safety capital initiatives, $1.4 million for bylaw staff for increased service calls and the short-term rental pilot. $2.2 million is included for 14 paramedics and 12 ambulances. There is $125,000 for adult school crossing guards to support 10 new locations. There's an additional $600,000 to support waste diversion due to increased tonnage. $1.6 million related to the increase in the community fund, bringing the total funding to $27 million. $1.2 million will be used to pay for the maintenance of new roads and sidewalks. There's a $1 million increase for the citywide capital reserve for growth per the long-range financial plan. There is $1 million added for resources and operating costs to prepare for the opening of the O-Train Line 2. $500,000 is added for the operation of 8 to 10 new parks annually. And finally, $700,000 is added to the library budget for the expansion of Sunday hours and a resource for virtual programming. Next slide, please.
This budget includes COVID-19 related pressures that flow into 2022 to respond to the pandemic. And these are shown separately within each service area due to the one-time nature of the costs. The costs relate to the loss of parks and recreation program revenue, which are net of lower expenses, personal protective equipment, and lower cohorts for our childcare to provide services in a safe and secure manner to our residents. There's an increase in temporary resources and personal protective equipment in long-term care to support the pandemic response. And social services relief funds will support our emergency shelters, our homelessness pandemic response until the end of March, as well as supporting our local community agencies. There's a one-time increase in the public health budget to respond to the pandemic, and this assumes funding from the province. Pressures also include lower transit ridership and sustained enhanced cleaning throughout 2022. The reduction in transit revenues continues to as the city continues to respond and recover from the pandemic. And we've assumed that the majority of these costs are offset by funding from senior levels of government. And if this funding doesn't materialize, the city has developed financial mitigation strategies that we've implemented in 2020 and 2021 to help fund these pressures. In addition to the budget reduction strategies, they've been initiated in parallel to this budget process, and we will leverage them and use them if required. The discretionary spending and hiring pauses currently in place will continue into the next year, and that assists in lowering the city's expenses. Additional operational and financial mitigation measures, including service reductions or deferral of our capital spending, may be required to offset these. Next slide, please. This slide summarizes the three key service initiatives and savings. Police service savings of $5 million relates to the integration of back office functions, their facilities, strategic plan, fleet rationalization, equipment rationalization, a capital review, civilianization, and management efficiency targets on spending. Innovative Client Services is launching an operational excellence targeted review that will look at ways to drive unnecessary cost and complexity out of the organization in our business processes through automation, standardization, and simplification. And these targeted efficiencies are estimated to save us $600,000. The staffing pause currently in place will roll into 2022, and that assists us in lowering the city's expenses by $7 million. And the discretionary spending pause currently in place will lower the city's expenses by $6 million. Can you move to the next slide, please? We'll now move to the rate budget. And the increase in the revenue is projected to be $22.6 million. It's based on the assumption that water consumption will increase in 2022 by 800,000 cubic meters. The growth expected in the number of water customers is helping keep the average bill down as more share in the fixed portion of the bill. And as we see increase in the revenue from the consumption volumes, this reduces the forecasted average annual water utility bill increased by $5 from what was originally estimated in our directions report. Like the tax budget, the rate budget also has to be balanced, and the additional revenue is set to recover the additional costs of delivering these services. The increase of $1.9 million includes the increase of $5.4 million to maintain the operations, which is primarily for projected labor contract settlements, increments and increases in cost of benefits. And the increase in costs is offset by the reduction of debt servicing costs of $3.5 million. Growth through programs and services is $900,000, and it's primarily as a result of the increased base funding to manage the growth in line with our long-range financial plan. The capital contribution is increasing by $19.8 million for all services in total, which is in line again with our long-range financial plan for rate-supported capital. Next slide, please. So we're now going to turn to the capital budget. Next slide, please. And the capital budget reflects various plans approved by council, including our transportation master plan, our infrastructure master plan, our development charges background study, and the LRFP 5 that assessed the state of repair of all the capital assets and recommended a plan for closing the infrastructure gap. These plans have all been incorporated in the proposed capital budget for 2022. The one-time federal gas tax funding of $58 million received in 2019 will be allocated to the infrastructure renewal over 3 years, and the $5 million previously approved by council to address the funding gap will be redirected to transit. We're in the third and final year of addressing that shortfall left by the cancellation of the provincial gas tax doubling, and there may be a small amount remaining to help close that gap in 2023. Debt is used in this budget within the limits established by council, and our debt servicing forecast is approximately 4.5% of our own source revenues for tax supported and 13% on the rate side. Next slide, please. So the proposed capital budget in 2022 is $989.5 million, and this reflects a $209 million increase over last year. Each year fluctuates depending on the capital needs, but the overall capital envelope is maintained over the 4-year forecast period. There's some larger projects in 2022 based on timing of our drinking water and wastewater services, our solid waste, our transit, our fleet, and police. Funding for the total capital program comes from tax rate, development charges, and debt. And the road resurfacing and sidewalk budgets were also increased by $39 million in 2022 to advance some of the projects and take advantage of our lower interest rates. The overall investment in active transportation and roads has increased by $133.3 million. As mentioned earlier, this budget reflects the recommendations from the long-range financial plans for tax and rate, increasing contributions to capital to reduce the infrastructure gap for both of those budgets. The largest capital investments are being made in pipes and roads, with 17.4% going to water, wastewater, and stormwater services, and 21.7% for our integrated roads projects, and 18.1% for transportation services. Transit service capital projects represent 18.7% of the capital budget overall, and the other tax-supported service areas make up for 21.1% of the budget. And a $15 million capital contribution is budgeted for 2022 for affordable housing. And that brings our overall investment since 2019 to $60 million. I'll pass it back to you, Isabel.
Next slide. Le budget d'immobilisation proposé de 980.
The capital program that was proposed is $989.5 million, is funded by different resources. We're using our reserves and our cash. This will be used for infrastructure. These funds represent about 59.9% of the capital programs funding. We also want to use about the development charges, cash and debt. In total, $252.7 million will be used with debt, and this will finance our capital program for 2022.
$989.5 million capital budget is funded from a variety of sources, but primarily with cash. The reserves portion, which is cash, is funded from contributions to capital on both the tax and rate side. This makes up 59.5% of the funding for capital. There is also development charge cash and debt to fund growth projects. In total, there is $252.7 million in new debt authority that is required to fund the proposed 2022 capital program. Next slide, please. This slide shows the percentage of the capital program used for renewal, growth, and regulatory or service enhancements initiatives, tax and rate combined, reflecting prior council's direction to maintain assets in a state of good repair. 69.6% of the $989.5 million is for renewal, 19.1% for growth, and 11.3% for regulatory and service enhancements. Next slide, please.
Thanks very much, Isabel. This slide provides a forecast for the 2022 year-end reserve balances. The management of reserves is an important factor for the city for the city's overall financial condition, as they impact both financial sustainability as well as our financial flexibility. The credit agencies have acknowledged that the city's strong reserve levels they're strong, and the fact that we have relatively low debt levels, and they're major attributes in terms of maintaining our high credit ratings. I mentioned that earlier, that our Moody's credit rating is AAA and our Standard & Poor's is AA. An operating reserve is generally used to stabilize or mitigate the impact of fluctuations in operating costs and revenues, or to accumulate funds for future or contingent liabilities. And capital reserves are used to fund capital works and are invested by the city until required for use, thereby earning interest. Restricted reserves are established by council when legislation requires funds received for a special purpose to be segregated and accounted for separately, and can be only used for a prescribed purpose. These reserve balances include the mitigation measures that were put in place in both 2020 and 2021, particularly the capital close and deferral capital amounts. The savings from discretionary and staffing pauses will only be recognized after confirming the financial results for 2021 and any return of surpluses back to the operating reserves as part of our year-end disposition report. The rate reserves also include capital close and deferred capital projects funds returned to source, and these could be borrowed by transit if required in 2022. In terms of the reserve opening balances on the slide, approximately $23 million will be used from the tax stabilization reserve in 2022 to mitigate the impact of COVID in our operating costs and our revenues. And if additional Safe Restart funding is received, these will be returned to source. The remainder are restricted, or they'll fund our various capital programs. Based on the current forecasts and the input into the draft 2022 operating and capital budget, operating reserves are projected to decrease slightly, and capital reserves are also projected to decrease, reflecting an increased investment in our infrastructure. Next slide, please. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is the end of our presentation. Committee, board, and commission budgets are scheduled to meet throughout November and December, and council meet on December 8th to consider the draft budget and any recommendations stemming from the budget meetings. Just before I conclude, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to offer my sincere thanks to the senior leadership and staff that has supported this budget process, and in particular to finance staff who have worked hard, and they're very dedicated in terms of pulling the budget together and the work not only at budget time but throughout the year. C'est la fin de notre présentation, Monsieur le Maire. Merci.
That's the end of our presentation, Mr. Mayor.
Madam Stephenson, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
A review of Budget 2022. We'll now hold our questions of process, if there are any, to go to Committee of Adjustment. Item 2, Committee of Adjustment, 2022 Draft Operating Budget, that City Council receive and table the Committee of Adjustment Draft Operating Budget. Received?
Received.
Table? Next is Crime Prevention Ottawa, Prévention de Crime d'Ottawa. No presentation. 2022 Draft Operating Budget, Crime Prevention Ottawa. The City Council receive and table the Crime Prevention Ottawa Draft Operating Budget. Received and tabled?
Received and tabled.
Next item with the presentation, Ottawa Police Services Board, Commission de Services Policiers d'Ottawa. Madame Deans et Monsieur Rogers et le chef de police, Mr. Slowly.
And we also have Mr. Slowly for the presentation. You have the floor. Go ahead.
Mr. Mayor and members of council, thank you for the opportunity to present and table the Ottawa Police Services Draft 2022 operating and capital budgets. As you are all aware, we are sitting at a critical juncture where policing is being reimagined in the broader context of community safety and well-being. The Ottawa Police Services Board has heard the calls for change. While we know there is a role for police in advancing community safety and well-being, we also recognize that certain types of calls would be better dealt with by other service providers who are better equipped to handle them. Last November, the board committed to making its best efforts to freeze or reduce the 2022 budget. And we remain committed to bending the cost curve and asking only for the resources needed for the provision of adequate and effective policing in the City of Ottawa. It is within this context that the board provided direction to the service to develop the 2022 budget with a starting point of 0%, with a clearly articulated justification for any additional resources needed to meet new pressures, maintain services, and invest in new areas to support strategic directions. Having this level of detailed information will enable the board to make decisions about where we should be investing, divesting, or maintaining resources more transparently to meet the needs of the Ottawa Police Service and address the expectations of our community. The board looks forward to hearing input from members of the public over the next couple of weeks, as this will be another critical input informing the board's decision-making about the budget. Ultimately, I believe the board shares the same goals as the service, members of this council, and the public at large, to have safer communities in our city, to reduce crime, and to ensure that all people are treated fairly in interactions with police. I will now pass it over to Chief Slowly to walk through high-level overview of the 2022 police budget.
Co-Chair Deans, thank you, Mayor, Council. I also want to recognize I have CAO Deputy Chief Steve Bell on the line with me, as well as CFO Cyril Rogers. Cyril and I will be conducting the rest of the presentation. And I would just ask if the city clerk.
Pardon me?
I just ask if the city clerk could post the PowerPoint presentation, please. Thank you, merci. Good afternoon, bonjour, Quay. The Ottawa Police Service has submitted a draft 2022 budget to the board to ensure the continued ability of the service to provide adequate and effective policing in the city of Ottawa, while also demonstrating an efficient use of police resources and taxpayer dollars. This draft 2022 budget was also constructed to ensure that the Ottawa Police Service achieves the board's 4 strategic priorities: advancing community policing, modernizing the police service, supporting member health and wellness, and improving equity, diversity, and inclusion. The submitted draft 2022 budget was built in a way that complies with the board's budget-related directions, motions, and resolutions. Specifically, the budget enables the optimal allocation of current resources to match workload and the effective engagement of community assets to share response to specific service demands. The draft budget provides the needed investments for the Ottawa Police Service to continue implementation of its multi-year plan for change and improve service delivery to the community. Changes and improvements that were requested by board members, community members, and Ottawa Police Service members. At this point, I'll turn things over to CFO Cyril Rogers. Can change the slide, please.
Thank you, Chief, Chair Deans, and Mr. Mayor. First, I would like to apologize. We have been experiencing some technical difficulties at Elgin this morning, and I'm calling in via my phone, so that's why I need to stay off video. You can go to the financial slide, please. I think it's probably 2 down.
Cyril, can you speak up a little? It's a little difficult to hear.
Okay, I'll speak a little louder here. Next slide, please. Okay, this table highlights the breakdown of the $14 million 2022 operating budget increase and its categories in accordance with the City of Ottawa budget reporting requirements. The service is submitting pressures of $14.7 million, which is required to maintain services and ensure continued delivery of adequate and effective policing. The $14.7 million is further broken down into $11.9 million, which is attributed to salary and benefit increases. These increases are driven by collective bargaining agreements, which is owned by the board in negotiations with our 2 unions. The OPS gross operating, the compensation and salary cost reflects 82% of the OPS gross operating budget. In addition to compensation related costs, there are legislative increases related to CPP and the additional statutory holiday, which was September 30th for National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. The further $2.8 million of this increase is attributed to increasing pressures from economic conditions such as inflationary pressures and contractual obligations to continue to deliver and maintain existing service levels. Significant pressures are being realized across fuel, medical and dental benefits, IT hardware, software, utilities, and facility operating costs. In the 2022 budget, there is 0 growth captured. This includes foregoing the previously forecasted increase of 30 annual growth officers that was presented during the 2021 budget process. This is removed with zero growth for 2022. The 2022 budget includes a continued focus on our commitment to change, placing duty of care, public trust, and community safety and well-being as the guiding principles of strengthening the community co-production of public safety, social infrastructure, and change. Included in these new services are significant investments to reflect the continued cultural change, increasing member health and wellness, the focus on call referral, implementation of a privacy lawyer and support, investments across investigative change strategies, and also Indigenous and Inuit strategies. Also investments aligned to data-driven service optimization so the service can better utilize data as we move forward. From an efficiencies perspective, the OPS budget includes $5.1 million worth of efficiencies. Up to and including since 2012, this brings the total efficiencies to $25.1 million, which reflects 7% of the net operating budget. Some of these areas of efficiencies are committed to a fleet and facilities rationalization, outsourcing of the collision reporting center to a third-party vendor, management interventions, and dedication to improve savings as we move forward. Also increases of $0.8 million reflected in the user fees and revenues as aligned to the board's policy for user fees. This results in an assessment growth of 1.7% or $5.2 million, and also $8.8 million increase reflective of a police tax levy rate increase of 2.86%. Next slide. The capital budget presented reflects an investment of $35.6 million for 2022. $12.6 million is required for the annual life cycle replacement of assets such as the fleet, our annual review program, and life cycling of fleet patrol units as an example. Continued life cycle review of our IT infrastructure such as network switches, firewalls, servers, telecommunications improvements such as the 911 system, data switches, and phone systems, and facility lifecycle costs related to ensure that we maintain the facilities at a good state of repair, such as sprinkler replacements, building automation system upgrades, etc. Strategic investments of $23.1 million reflect enhancements and retrofits to the Elgin location, the Queensville location, and investments in the IT and comm center to ensure that we have a backup redundancy plan to ensure continued business continuity of operations as it relates to IT infrastructure and the comm center. That concludes the presentation for today. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Councillor Deans and Mr. Rogers. Next is the Ottawa Public Library. We have a presentation by Councillor Luloff and CEO Danielle McDonald. Oh, I'm sorry, yes, received and tabled police budget.
Received and tabled.
Received and tabled.
The floor is yours.
Just let Caitlin get the slides up. Alors, Monsieur le Maire, membre de conseil, bonjour.
Mr. Mayor, council members, good morning. As a chair of the board of the library, it's an honor to present to you the Ottawa Public Library Draft Budget 2022 with our Director, Executive Officer, Danielle McDonald. Before I start, I'd like to thank each of my colleagues on the board and the City Council for their support to the library in the past year.
Current year's budget, we had a big ask for Council to support our efforts to eliminate fines, and you supported us and our community. And despite the ebb and flow of hours of opening during the past 10 months, we've seen more and more customers return to using library services. And in fact, more than 400,000 unique library cards have been used to access library services at some point in time in the last 3 years, with just over 232,000 of those having used library services in the last 12 months. And I should clarify that those figures represent only those who used their card, as we know there are countless others who access our services, be they in person or online, without a library card. So that brings us to today, and how with your support in 2022, we can build on our commitment to reduce barriers and improve access to services. Next slide, please. The draft 2022 budget being presented here today is based on the OPL board-approved financial framework. Aussi, le plan financier pour l'année 2021 répond à l'objectif de 2,3.
And it meets the objective of $2.335 million established by City Council in June.
Funding to ensure continued delivery of safe and inclusive services supporting literacy and learning. And it also supports our strategic priority to reduce barriers by improving access. In 2021, the board and council approved the removal of all late fees and increased our ability to put in place virtual systems to support online programming. In 2022, we intend to continue to break down barriers and improve access to services by increasing Sunday hours at 10 branches and at InfoService, our help and information line. We would also make permanent a new position specifically tasked with ongoing development of online virtual programming, increasing the reach and innovation of OPL's library services. C'est ce que les clients de bibliothèque nous ont demandé.
That's what the clients have asked for.
Importante initiative pour
on top of these initiatives for the service plan, the budget
le remplacement
plans an improvement of main assets used for service delivery in the next chapter of our history. So thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I'd like to clarify that in this project, we will continue to build the future network of libraries in Ottawa. Actually, the budget includes the last payment for the service in Riverside South.
walk us through the specifics. Over to you, Danielle.
Thank you, Chair. If we could just have the next slide, please. Thank you. An overall view of the library's 2022 draft budget shows that the board has kept within the directed increase from council of $2.335 million. Notre budget total passera à 56.
Our total budget will be $56,666,000.
City partners in the maintenance or replacement of core building systems at a number of branches, which, if approved, will bring the total investment in the library to $58.547 million. Next slide, please. Le budget préliminaire de 2022 couvre.
The 2022 base budget will cover mandatory requirements as cost of living and necessary adjustment.
Through the efforts of staff, we have found efficiencies in how we operate, which has enabled us to absorb licensing and maintenance increases for 2022. The majority of the budget increase for 2022 is required to address mandatory pressures. However, a nearly equal funding increase has been directed toward the removal of barriers to library services. And I'll say a little bit more about that if we could proceed to the next slide, please. In addition to the increases in Sunday hours and virtual services that the chair mentioned earlier, in September, the board approved the provision of public services on the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation, effective September 2022. And the associated funding request to support this has been included in the 2022 draft budget before you. As you know, we have been working with our host nation partners to advance reconciliation. And this is but one way we can create meaningful discussion about the effects of residential schools and the legacy they have left behind. Ce financement servira à payer la rémunération à tarif.
This will help pay the fees of staff who will be working on this holiday.
2022 Library Capital Program utilizes $1.54 million of the OPL's budget, along with $3.56 million in development charge funding and 1.88 million of city allocated funds for maintenance and accessibility improvements. So all this brings the total capital portion of the budget to just under 7 million at 6.982. For 2022, the majority of OPL funded spending in the capital program is for facilities, in particular,
$842,000 for a facility aimed on growth in the Riverside South area.
For branch-related improvements across the system. Over to you to finalize this. Thank you, Chair Luloff.
Well, we thank you, Mr. Mayor and colleagues, for your support of the proposed 2022 library budget. And thanks for giving us the opportunity to present it to you today. Alors, merci beaucoup à toute l'équipe de BPO.
Thank you to the whole team of the library for this presentation and for your good work on this budget. And also to our leadership teams, especially our executive officer. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Madam McDonald.
Next is the Ottawa Board of Health, Conseil de Santé d'Ottawa, Chair Keith Eglai and Dr. Vera Etches. Chair Eglai, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and I'll ask the clerk's office to put up the first slide. While they're doing that, I just want to take this opportunity to thank OPH staff, led by Dr. Etches, for crafting a pragmatic budget for 2022 that balances the line between our continuing COVID response into 2022 and reestablishing our traditional or core OPH services. Certainly not an easy task. The other thing that I want to mention quickly before we went to the slides, Mr. Mayor, and I guess this falls into the breaking news category, but as the council meeting was going on, we received written confirmation from the province that our 2021 COVID asks will be covered. We just received that within the last hour. So I know there's been a lot of questions amongst board members and councillors as to when we would receive that confirmation. We have just received that confirmation in writing this morning. As we table the 2022 Ottawa Board of Health draft operating budget, we will cover budget highlights and assumptions, provide a brief overview of Ottawa public health programs and funding sources, discuss estimated requirements to continue to address the COVID-19 response, and provide an overview of the 2022 budget changes. This draft budget reflects best estimates to continue to respond to the pandemic while limiting impacts on the health and well-being of Ottawa residents. OPH will continue to work with local and provincial partners to identify areas to strengthen the impact of resources invested in the public health. Slide 2, please. We are presenting a balanced budget of $122.7 million, which is broken down between $75 million of base funding and $47.7 million of one-time funded requests. It incorporates an inflationary growth base increase of $1.07 million from the City of Ottawa, assumes a 0% provincial base increase from the Ministry of Health, assumes that all one-time requirements will be needed for the entire year and are provincially funded at 100%, and lastly, does not include provisions for activities related to providing a COVID-19 booster vaccine to the general public. Such budget impacts are currently unknown. A full costing to administer booster vaccines will be provided to the Board of Health if identified in the provincial plans. Next slide, please. Funding for the public health services consists of several categories. Cost-shared funds are used to deliver programs to adhere to the Ontario Public Health Standards as they relate to the Health Protection and Promotion Act, and they represent the majority of the OPH budget. The next largest envelope is 100% provincially funded programs, which include Healthy Babies, Healthy Children, the Ontario Seniors Dental Care Program, Indigenous Health, and harm reduction. The last category, which is 100% city funded, includes adult and children dental expenses, which are mostly recovered from community and social services and other programs such as mental health, substance use, and injury prevention and school-based outreach. Since the pandemic began in March of 2020, OPH has had to divert approximately 75% of its staff away from its programs to support the COVID-19 response. The Chief Medical Officer of Health directed all health units to take all necessary measures to respond to COVID-19 while continuing to maintain critical public health programs and services identified in their pandemic plans. OPH has done this and continues to monitor and adjust resources as required. In the summer of 2021, OPH began restoring additional core programs, healthy growth and development, school immunizations, mental health and substance use, sexual health and harm reduction. Decisions on which programs to restore were based on community needs and where there was a measurable health burden. Next slide, please. This next slide lists programs that were required to be augmented over and above the base cost shared and 100% funded programs in 2021 and required to be continued for 2022 in order to respond to the pandemic. The areas include case and contact management, ensures that we meet ministry and federal guidelines to follow up with residents that test positive for COVID-19 and their close contacts within 24 hours. Since the beginning of the pandemic, Ottawa has had more than 30,000 people have tested positive for COVID-19 and 93,000 close contacts that required follow-up. Our COVID-19 school support team works with over 300 schools and 4 school boards to implement provincial standards and guidance. Areas of focus include providing infection prevention and control advice, supporting schools in the isolation of people who test positive and their contacts, vaccination efforts, supporting testing, and surveillance. Infection prevention and control monitors and responds to any resident or healthcare worker that tests positive for COVID-19 in institutions such as long-term care facilities, child care facilities, and congregate settings. The COVID-19 pandemic response has seen an unprecedented surge in outbreaks across all institutional settings, and this year the unit has responded to 995 outbreaks, which is double the outbreaks recorded in 2020. Communications, community engagement and operations manage all communications with various external and internal stakeholders, as well as provide support to community partners with information, resources, and guidance. Messaging to all stakeholders must be continuously adapted as the pandemic requirements and response changes. Cultural adaptation is also a priority, which includes work with community leaders and organizations who can help build supports for populations at higher risk of harms in COVID-19 and other challenges to health. COVID-19 vaccine unit is responsible for storing, distributing, and administering vaccines, ensuring maintenance of vaccine cold chain and storage protocol, monitoring vaccine safety, and tracking vaccine coverage. In 2021, our clinics delivered over 993,000 COVID-19 doses and continue to support the ongoing vaccination effort. Surveillance and medical support analyze interpret COVID information, outbreaks, clusters, and societal impacts data, provides ongoing reporting and technical guidance for case and outbreak investigations, specific settings, and practices. Our emergency response phone line responds to all COVID-19 related calls and emails from the general public, schools, child care centers, workplaces, and healthcare providers. And finally, logistics, information technology, finance, staffing support provide support services to the organization as a whole, such as new digital application solutions, hardware support, procurement, asset tracking, supply distribution, and staff scheduling. Next slide, please. This next slide provides a high-level summary of the 2022 budget expenditure changes. In order to maintain existing services, the budget includes a provision of $1.07 million for the future negotiation of collective agreements. This base pressure is fully funded by the City of Ottawa. Next is a list of one-time pressures for areas that are referenced in the previous slide, and they amount to $47.7 million. As stated earlier, it is assumed that these specific pressures will be provincially funded at 100%. Next slide, please. Slide 6 provides a high-level overview of the 2022 budgeted revenue changes. Of note, and with respect to COVID, the province has confirmed funding for 45 school nurses till the end of July. The $2.6 million indicated represents the adjustment required to bring the funding amount up to the 2022 approval. All remaining COVID funding is expected to be announced in 2022. In summary, the combined budget increase from base and one-time requirements amounts to $48.8 million. Next slide, please. And that concludes our presentation. We'll be happy to take any questions, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Thank you very much. And that the City Council receive and table the draft operating budget for Ottawa Board of Health. Received and tabled. Thank you very much. Next is the Innovative Client Services Department, Direction Générale des Services Innovateurs pour la Clientèle, 2022 Fleets, Vehicle and Equipment Plans. Received? And final, before we get back to the main budget, is item number 8, FTE Analysis Report Information Supplemental to Budget Estimates. Received?
Received.
Received. Okay. So are there any questions of a procedure or process nature for the budget? Okay, so the report recommendations are that City Council receive and table the draft 22 operating capital budget at its meeting November 3rd for subsequent consideration by Council sitting in Committee of the Whole to be held on December 8th, 2021. And 2, that the City Council refer the relevant portions of the 2022 operating capital budgets to each standing committee of Council, IT Subcommittee, and the Transit Commission for their consideration and recommendations to Council sitting in Committee of the Whole to be held on December 8th, 2021. Sorry, Councillor El Shantiri on the motion, a process question.
Just a process, and if I can have Wendy just answer a quick question about the capital budget. The number we've seen, the 68 million, I think, or 680, that's the capital. If you can put the last slide of the capital budget. I don't know if you have it or you know the number.
Are you talking about the entire capital budget for the city?
The number, the change in the number. I'm interested because Jasmine said that would change, if I remember correctly what she said, that's to deal with our infrastructure, because we had a report in 2012 about basically our infrastructure. I just want to make sure, is that number increased from the past, and how much they increase?
Well, I think, Council, that's not really a process question. Okay. Wendy, can you provide that to the Councillor offline?
Okay. Yep, happy to.
We do that.
Thank you very much. On the 2 recommendations as presented, carried, adopté. Next is motion to adopt reports. Motion portant adoption de rapport. Councillor Kavanagh, please.
Que le rapport du directeur des services
that the report from the Director of Fleet Services entitled 2022 Fleet Vehicle and Equipment Plans, Information Supplemental to the Budget Estimates, and the report from the Director of Human Resources entitled FTE Analysis Report, Information Supplemental to the Budget Estimates, to be received and adopted as amended.
Adopté. Carried.
Carried.
Councillor Kavanagh and Cloutier.
Que le règlement suivant.
That the following bylaw be read and passed to confirm the proceedings of the Council meeting of November 3rd, 2021. Carried.
Councillor Kavanagh. Cloutier.
Que la délibération du Conseil.
That the proceedings to the City Council meeting of November 3rd, 2021 be adjourned. Carried.
Thank you all very much, and thanks to our staff for a very thorough presentation today on the tabling of the budget. Merci beaucoup. Meeting adjourned.